Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Average Superstar TV. I'm your host, Lauren Lepre. Please give us a subscribe, a like, comment, and share. And when I started this show, I said I was going to go all over the place, whatever I thought was an entertaining show to my audience. And this week, I got a very special guest. I got Doctor Leslie Madrak aboard. And in today's world, I just know we have a lot of misleading or, when it comes to people being diagnosed with stuff. And I figured, why not actually bring a doctor on? So, Leslie, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Really happy to be here. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Could you just give us your background and what you have a degree in, what you do?
Sure. I'm a general psychiatrist. I also work in addiction medicine. I've been a psychiatrist for over 20 years now. Graduated from Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine and then did my residency training at UMDNJ, which is now Rowan, here in New Jersey. So worked in the hospital, worked outpatient, which is what I'm doing now, and just very happy to be here. So I do a little bit of everything.
Good. Jack of all trades. So perfect. So when we want to jump right into personality disorders, and I know there's a bunch of layers to unpack here. But I know one of the things people have been talking about lately was narcissistic.
Yes.
So everybody thinks they know, including me. But why don't you give us an actual proper definition of what someone who is narcissistic is?
Yeah. Well, so personality disorders is really tricky. So a lot of people just don't really understand why someone is the way they are. So it's really like a maladaptive pattern of the way that they deal with life over time. And it affects the way people deal with people in their lives, whether it be at work, whether it's in their personal relationships. So narcissistic personality is one that it seems that it's the hot topic on social media right now. Everybody's talking about it, living with a narcissist, dealing with a narcissist. And everyone's met one. So, they're the people that are really boastful and they have big egos and they feel like they're special and they are entitled to be treated like they're special. They have this sense of entitlement. They have to be first in line and they have to get all the perks for everything. And they really don't have any regard for other people. They don't really have any empathy for others. They don't recognize when they're criticizing others, and they really just don't care. So it's, as you can see, it's unfortunate to have to deal with somebody like that all the time.
That's a lot of info and a lot to unpack. So is this something that is like it happens as their life goes on, like a defense mechanism? Is it something inherited? Is it like how's this person come invented even?
Well, all the personality disorders do have a biological predisposition. So some of it is genetic. Some of it might be ways that they've learned to deal with their environment in a negative way. Maybe ways that they've seen others grow up. Maybe they've had an early traumatic experience in life that's kind of created this sort of maladaptive way of dealing with others. So, and they're really tricky because the part that's frustrating as a person in the real world or as a therapist is that with a personality disorder, they think everyone else is wrong. So they think that, nothing's wrong with me. We call that egocentric. So it means that, it's acceptable to them the way that they deal with things. And why is everybody else giving them a hard time? So when they come into therapy, they usually don't really come to treatment specifically for that reason. They come for other reasons. So say, for instance, if someone broke up with them or they got passed over for a job that they wanted. Usually it'll be maybe an anxiety or depression related to it. But when you come in and you see that their patterns, you realize that it's this personality disorder that's creating difficulty in their lives.
Gotcha. So just so we don't cross worlds here, what you just said was personality disorder, not narcissist.
All of them in general, but including narcissist. Yes.
Okay. So always want to wonder, is it when someone's narcissist and you said, hey, they need all the perks, they need to be in line first, me. When they're alone, are they still on top of the world, or are they looking for constant approval? Do they cry? Is it like just really a shield? That's not who they really are.
It's interesting that you say that, because really it's a defense mechanism for feeling inadequate and insecure. So you will never really see that aspect of them, but there's actually a term that's called narcissistic injury, which could be really debilitating for them. They can even become suicidal because it's a humiliation. And if they feel that ego broken, it could be very difficult for them to be able to bounce back from that. But they're not really aware that they have that defense. You know, it's, yes, they have these feelings of insecurity, but usually they quick jump on something else and start bragging about something else. So
sounds like people I know in the film business.
I'm in any business, unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah. So that is, if something crashes, they just jump right to the next one, and you know that this is to feed their ego.
Yes. Constantly. And if you're not constantly feeding it, they're going to be really frustrated with you. So
yeah, I believe I countered one with won't say names through my last film that constantly every 2 hours needed some sort of an update of like, and nothing was happening. It's like, hey, we're at work. Like, stop calling. It was like they needed something to make them feel good to pass it along to other people, you know? So yeah, this is another reason I was like, yo, I want to hear direct. I want to get direct answers here. So suppose okay, so let me break this down. How does someone in a family or someone who's dating someone who's narcissistic, like what do you look for to realize like, like we might have one here?
Yeah. Well, just that sense of entitlement that they have to be treated special in a certain way. That they constantly need to be stroked, their ego being stroked. And it's difficult in a relationship. It's so frustrating because, you know, you always feel criticized because they're so much better than you. So they're always kind of reminding you how much better they are than you. And they don't have that empathy. So you really feel like they're cold, distant. You don't really get that reciprocation because they're so focused on themselves and so self-centered that they're really not caring about your needs. So you end up feeling really like neglected and alone all the time. So it's really frustrating.
Would you say in your field, is there a cure or any way to reach these people?
Ooh, yeah, it's a tough one. And the reason it's so tough is because of that egocentric aspect to it, because they feel like it's right and it feels right to them. They don't really feel the need to change it. But over time, if you develop a therapeutic relationship with them and they begin to trust you, then you can kind of gently call to their attention that, you know, maybe these ways, remember this example of when this happened at work and you were really bragging about yourself and then it blew up in your face and nobody wanted to be around you and treat you that way. Or maybe it was that relationship. So when you call it to their attention and they start to see those patterns, then they may be willing to change if they realize that, hey, they're not getting what they want because of these patterns in their lives.
I've heard sometimes couples say when someone's dating someone like that or any of the personality disorders that they might tape them, like record them on their phone and play it back and be like, do you understand what you just did here? And like, do you think that's like a smart way, at least to like set an example, show, hey, this is exactly what you're like. I couldn't edit this, okay?
It's not a bad idea. Unfortunately, they'll probably get caught up in it. Don't I sound so good? Doesn't my voice sound good. So they may really love that attention that they're on record. Who knows? But you can do that. I mean, sometimes having a neutral party involved and, having a therapist, I predominantly do medication treatment, but I like to incorporate therapy into all aspects of my work. So I would do that. And I have done that over time. Like, this isn't working for you. And I think once you establish that relationship, they're more open to seeing that,
Is it? Because I don't want to go getting you affected anyway in your field, but I mean, is there just people that they're just not going to be reached?
I don't think there's no hope for anyone. Although when you have a really strong personality disorder, it's definitely a little bit of a challenge. So at least you can keep it at wraps a little bit, but do they ever completely go away? They might start to go back to their old patterns over time, but I don't think it's impossible. No, I think everyone has the potential to be treated.
When you even get one of these as a patient, is it like, did they want to? Like, did they actually feel bad for something? Like I need to change, or is there someone paying for it? Like, you have to talk to somebody.
Well, it's usually something else that brings them in. So they might be depressed or they might be anxious. And, in my world, I see it as, okay, somebody calls you and you might be working with somebody else, but, you have to be right on. You have to answer that call immediately, or else, this is an emergency, even though it may not be, it might be just I'm having a bad day, and, give someone else their time. Or, they may want special treatment. They may want longer sessions. They may want to spill into somebody else's session and take some of their time.
Is that more of an ego thing? Like, look, I got extra time, like fully knowing that there's someone else that's, the hours that, for you.
Well, you really have to have those boundaries. So that's exactly what you really don't want to do, is give them more time. You don't want to create any special treatment. You want to treat everyone the same and give everybody the same opportunity. And they may not like that. So sometimes you really have to have very strict rules with them. These are the hours that you need to call. This is the time that you're allotted. This is the number to reach me at. You're not coming to my house. You're not calling me on my personal cell. So you really have to be direct about that. And they won't like it, but you have to do that.
Wow. So, yeah, let's jump over to another one. So, I know you said borderline personality disorder. You say, is that like the top hardest to deal with?
I think, I'm surprised with social media. Certainly everybody gets narcissism and deals with it. But I think borderline personality is just so confusing to people because their behavior is just so erratic and inconsistent. And it could really make somebody in a relationship just so confused about what's going on and kind of feel really hopeless about the situation. It's really tragic if you're in a relationship with somebody that's a severe borderline. It can be really difficult. But with borderline personality, they feel really empty and they don't really know who they are. So they're frantically, they will do anything not to be abandoned by someone. And they have this intense fear of being abandoned by someone. So they will go through dramatic efforts to avoid that from happening. And if you even say, well, I have to go to work, I have to leave now, and they don't want you leaving, they might get really angry, furious. They could get physical with people. Their lives are just complete chaos, and they bring that chaos to everybody else's life.
Could that fall under someone who might be a serial dater too? That this can't, breaks up with someone over the weekend and has someone new by Monday?
Oh, well, definitely for a lot of them, but certainly somebody that has such a fear for abandonment, absolutely they will. But because they're so nice 1 minute, and then they might devalue you. You're the best person in the world 1 minute, and then you're the worst the next. So when that happens, you're kind of confused as the other person in the relationship, like, what's going on here? Not really understanding it.
But this sounds even more dangerous to date than a narcissist to me so far.
I think so. I mean, yes, they're both equally. It's not fun being on the other side of it, but you just never know. I always compare borderline personality, if people have seen the movie in the 90s, like Single White Female.
Yeah.
They don't really have a sense of self, so they might mirror someone else. They might want to take on their lives. They might want to like sabotage their lives, anything, not to leave them. I feel like every decade there's like a new film that talks about borderline personality. In the 80s, we had Fatal Attraction with Glenn Close and Michael Douglas. And, I think he wanted to go to work one day. And because he just had something to do, I think they met 24 hours earlier and had to go to work. And, she comes out with like her wrists bleeding. And I'm like, if that's what you're dealing with. And he's like, holy crap, what am I dealing with? And that's going to be your life until she stalks you and then, boils your daughter's rabbit.
Let's talk an origin of that, though. What makes someone be borderline?
Well, it's complicated. Yes, there may be a genetic predisposition with parents that might have other mental health disorders. They may have some really early childhood traumas, which is why, they have such a fear of abandonment. And even that lack of sense of self, they might have been neglected. And because of that, they're trying to draw attention to themselves in some way and really don't like themselves. People haven't treated them well, so their feeling about themselves is not so great either. So they may do things like cut themselves, even superficially, not necessarily to kill themselves, but sometimes they will actually try to end their lives, but they might self-mutilate, they might use substances, they might be promiscuous, they might drive a car recklessly. So they will be constantly chaotic and bring chaos to your life as well.
Okay. So how on earth do you even reach someone like that?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, really establishing a relationship of trust. Trust is really important because if they haven't been able to trust people in their lives before, even that fundamental parents, people that they grew up with, if they didn't have that stable relationship, it's going to be hard for them to trust you. And they're going to do the same thing with you as they do with everyone else in the world. They're going to overvalue you. You're the best doctor in the world. And then, if you don't answer their call in 5 or 10 minutes, you're the worst. Or if you say to them that's not something appropriate, they may take insult to that. And so you really have to work with your own emotional gauge with that. Yes, they could be really frustrating to work with, but if you stay consistent with them and you don't disappear and you don't abandon them, they will build that trust and they will be able to develop healthier patterns over time. But it's a challenge for sure. Absolutely.
So what would you say to someone? I won't even go into the dating department, but family, like how does a family member even see a flag like this to maybe see about getting them treatment?
Yeah, well, if they are constantly arguing with everyone in their lives, if they're creating problems in other people's lives that they can't contain it and it spills into other people's lives, or they're hot and cold, you feel like you kind of have to walk on eggshells with them all the time and tiptoe around certain subjects, or they might be a little bit explosive, then you just want to keep boundaries with them as well. Like you have to establish what you feel is appropriate in your life. And when they create too much trouble for you, or you say, this isn't going to be a part of my life. But I think as long as you're doing that with kindness and gentleness and love, I feel like they'll respond to that because they really do want to have boundaries, even though they don't know what's like an appropriate boundary with another person. I think if you do it kindly and gently with them, then they can respect that. So the more you say, just stay in this frame in my life and don't cross that line, I think that's probably the best way to manage them.
So you would say, because you would almost say the borderline personality can be way more destructive than like someone who's narcissist. Narcissist is looking for this constant validation, right?
Right. They will try to bulldoze over you. And if they don't get what they want and they become frustrated, and not because you're not giving them the attention or the power or whatever it is they're seeking, then they'll just move on to the next thing. Borderline, because they have such a fear of that abandonment, they might stalk you for a while. If you're trying to let go, they're going to probably tighten their reins even more. So it's going to be hard to get them out of your life. So if I had a choice, I would probably pick a narcissist over borderline.
So before I jump into the next one, I know you said Glenn Close, was a good example. So was Jennifer Jason Leigh in Single White Female. Going back to Narcissist, is there any movie character you could say like right there fits narcissism?
Well, actually, the movie Gaslight, I don't know if you've seen that, but it was from like the 1940s, Ingrid Bergman. And it's so funny because narcissistic personality has become so popular to talk about these days, in the last decade or so, we actually created the term gaslight. So, now we're gaslighting people, because in the movie, the man in her life was turning the gaslights on and off, and she felt like it was her imagination. So they make you feel like you're the one that's losing your mind all the time, because it's never their fault. It's always someone else's fault. So because of that, you kind of start questioning yourself. So that's probably the best one I could think of right now.
Gotcha. And then I guess the round 3 would be psychopaths.
Oh, yes. So that's another one.
So what is the actual definition of that before you even go any further?
So it used to be called, it's antisocial personality disorder. That term sociopath and psychopath, they're really all that mean the same thing. It doesn't mean someone is actually psychotic, like they're not hearing voices.
So sociopath and psychopath are the same definition.
Yep. Antisocial, psychopath, sociopath, just another name for the same thing that's kind of changed over time, probably because there's a little bit of a stigma attached to those names or confusion about those names.
The psycho, I'm sure people don't like that, because it's, it's not the nicest word, but yeah.
Right. And, but really it's really that criminal behavior, actually. It's the person that, violates the rights of others, and they don't care, and they really don't care about your feelings. They might actually even enjoy, hurting other people, because they really don't have empathy, and they're very deceitful. They'll be very conniving. If there's someone in the office, my radar goes up when someone is actually charming. Snakes are charming, right? So if someone's very cunning, and they can be that, they put on that charm, and it's always on my radar that, maybe there's a motivation here. Maybe there's some secondary gain that they're looking for. They do tend to use substances. They do tend to break the law. So, and they're not always people that are like killers. You're not always dealing with like Hannibal Lecter all the time. But there could be some very legal activity. Antisocials that just basically just don't care about your feelings or any regard for you necessarily.
Wow.
Yeah.
And just reminds me of someone in my wrestling world I used to know. But what do you even do for a person like this? And number one, is this something they're born with, or are they made?
There is a genetic predisposition too. Sometimes there's other antisocials in the family, or sometimes there are family members that might have substance use disorders and things like that. It's also an environmental thing. So if people have grown up in broken homes or homes of neglect, or, maybe have been from one foster home to another, they may have learned maybe illegal ways to deal with things in order to survive. It's become more of a survival mechanism for them to be deceitful and lying. So it's a difficult one to not just engage. Once again, you have to build trust there, but there's really some military camp type places that actually work with people with really behavioral issues. And it's still, they probably say it's the one that's the hardest to actually break that pattern. But I still think in I always think there's hope for rehabilitation for everybody, really.
Well,
So,
that
yeah.
means you're a good doctor because you believe that, you know? Yeah. What I mean, it sounds to me, especially with that one, the best thing you could do is just separate yourself from them. I mean, I don't know what other advice you could say, but besides let the doctors try to handle them, provided they could get, they want even to be helped,
Right, right. Well, certainly in a relationship, they're going to be lying to you all the time, and they're always going to blame you for everything.
Mhm.
And they may drag you into a precarious situation that you're like, then what? They're going to draw you into trouble if they're always creating trouble in their own lives. So probably best to stay away from that. Absolutely.
And if God forbid this is one of your family members you care about, where
Yeah.
do you start? Like,
Yeah. I love you, but you have to have that wall in between you a little bit, depending on how much, because there's always a range. Sometimes people have a little treat, and when you read about these things, you're going to hear that everybody has some of these traits. That's actually a normal thing. But if there's
or
4 or 5 things that really are pervasive and really stand out in their lives over a period of time, that's when it really becomes a disorder.
gotcha. Okay. And could this be this could be passed on? I mean, could all this be passed on to having another child?
Yes, genetically it can be, but also I would say that people pick up on your patterns. Kids see that, and they model themselves after their parents too. So if they're seeing sort of slippery kind of behavior, they're more prone to learning that from them,
Mhm.
especially if it's getting them what they want. If it's serving a purpose and they're get good at it, they can get what they want.
Do they know they're wrong, or do they just think like this was the way it seemed right, and it was working, so ride it out?
Yeah, they don't really have any conscience, which is really scary to think about. So they don't tend to feel guilt. They don't really have remorse about things. It's just what they do. So um, they don't really care about how it affects other people. The only time it really affects them is, if they end up in jail for something, that's going to affect them. But it's still probably someone else's fault. They still don't always accept their own ownership for what they did.
So anybody in the audience that's this might be hitting home with, and they know somebody, like what would you advise for them to even start trying to help someone like this that might have one of these three?
So if they really needed help, I mean, certainly
Or
there's
just know a family
resources.
member or something like that sounds like them. You hit the nail on the head. How did they go about helping them?
I would say, well, certainly if they needed a place to live, they would have to, possibly go to a shelter environment or get in contact with a social worker or a crisis center. I think just helping them to engage in some kind of treatment, because it's not always just the antisocial. They're either getting into trouble all the time with the law or they're using substances. If it's some other kind of disorder that they're dealing with, like maybe the substance issue is their primary disorder and they're just getting their needs met by using their maladaptive personality, then maybe treating the disorder first of the substance use and getting that kind of help first. They could kind of work on their personality after they get clean or sober, that type of thing. So it's almost never, there's always something else going on.
So, is there when it comes to this, the psychopath, is there even a true end game? Are they fixable?
Yeah, it's probably the lowest amount of success even with treatment, but if you're able to treat all those other things around it, I think there's the opportunity to change their ways. And once again, I mean, you always hear these stories, which I love, of people that have been in and out of prison for years at a
Yeah.
time and then have a moment of clarity and realize that this isn't the way they want to live anymore, and change their lives and get a career and establish a job and a family and all of those things. Those stories really do happen, probably not as often as we'd like, but I really feel like there's possibility for that to happen for sure.
That's where you and the other doctors of the world come in. Hopefully they could all be reached, right?
Absolutely. There's so much need out there. Absolutely.
And borderline personnel, like, is there a way to reach them as well?
I think so. I mean, really, with the borderline, there's a lot of other disorders going on there too. So you're usually dealing with someone that has an anxiety disorder. They may have panic attacks. They may have severe depression. They might be bipolar. So because there's always other disorders that are playing into it, they're usually coming into treatment for those other disorders. So by treating those, you can actually kind of work on, and it's really not so much medication treated the personality disorder. You can treat the other disorders like bipolar with medicine, but then it's really the therapy piece that comes in, because it's really teaching those ways of saying, do you see how this is not working in your life? This is a pattern in your life. Let's work on changing that. So a lot of times it's working on even a person's self-esteem, getting them to trust themselves. They can't trust themselves, they can't trust other people. And a lot of management of crisis, their emotions are so chaotic and their lives are so chaotic, so they don't even know how to manage an emergency situation. So if they're feeling suicidal or they're feeling like they're going to harm themselves in some way, how to establish, a treatment plan for themselves in advance so that they can't be so destructive. So you kind of have to start at those safety measures first, and then work on the little parts as time goes on by.
What's why I got you here for another one? What's the proper definition for bipolar?
Well, bipolar, there's a bipolar 1 and there's bipolar 2. So bipolar is more of like the traditional classic bipolar. The old term for that was manic depression. So what that means is someone can have mania for days at a time, sometimes weeks at a time, where they're euphoric, expansive, on top of the world, talking a lot, not needing to sleep, getting into multiple projects at once, being kind of reckless, intrusive. So it's a little different than borderline personality. I think that a lot of times people confuse the two, but the issue is you could actually have both. So you can actually have bipolar disorder and you can actually have borderline personality. So it's difficult to tease out sometimes because you see those traits. But then the other pole is that deep depression, and they get very, very severe depressions where sometimes they can't get out of bed, they're lethargic, they have no interest in things, they have no energy, they maybe sleep too much or can't sleep at all, their appetite changes, concentration changes, they may feel like they want to die. So it's a difficult disorder to deal with. However, bipolar is very treatable. It's very treatable with medicine. It's very treatable with therapy, probably even more so than the personality disorders, because people don't like the way they feel. So they do come to treatment because they recognize the symptoms and they want to fix them. It's a problem in their life. They recognize that as a problem in their lives. So, and bipolar 2 is more of like a milder version of that. So you might have, a couple days of euphoria or high energy levels, and then maybe a couple days of the severe depression or so. So that's even harder to tease out from borderline, because the borderline always has changes in mood. So, but you really have to look at people consistently over time. I don't think it's fair to someone for them to like walk into your office and say, "Oh, you're borderline." Because you really have to look at them and establish their patterns over time. And sometimes people already present to you, they already have a history of a diagnosis, and they've been in and out of treatment for many years. That might be the case. So.
And I mean, is this something also that could be passed on to children?
Yes. Well, bipolar disorder is very, usually 1 to 2% of the population is bipolar. So when you think about it, even 1 out of 100 people,
Yeah,
that's pretty common.
a
But
lot.
it's actually considered a very high functioning diagnosis. And I think more and more people are talking about it in society. Fortunately, mental illness doesn't have to be the stigma that it used to be. So you could be very high functioning, especially if you stay in treatment. I think sometimes the issue is some people they go off their medication because they have side effects from the medicine, or they're just tired of playing the patient role, or they like feeling the euphoria. So sometimes the medicine, because they're mood stabilizers, are kind of keeping those extremes in check.
They want that high in a small way. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And sometimes you can't blame them because, if they've had such a dark depression for so long and they had a taste of feeling on top of the world, it's like, who wouldn't want that? It's human nature. But if they can stay on their medicine and they're stable with it, they can do anything they want in the world. And some are highly successful, so that's not going to hold them back.
Awesome. I think this was awesome. I think this was one awesome, informative show for this audience.
Oh, thank you. I was so excited that you feel like your audience would be interested in hearing
Yeah, I'm going to be on Average Superstar TV. Is going to go many different directions. Whatever I think is an entertaining, informative guest, I will have them on. So, what days give you the floor for anyone who wants to reach you, or is there any project you're trying to pull together?
Well, I guess if anyone has any questions about what I've talked about, if they have a loved one or they're just not sure about how these personality disorders are treated, or anything else that we talked about for that matter, you can reach me at my email, which is Dr. Leslie, spelled out DoctorLeslie at yahoo.com. And I'm looking forward to my next projects are going to be some wellness seminars. I'd really like to do more workshops, either online, virtually, and maybe in the future, as the pandemic gets a little better, in-person seminars of mind, body, spirit, wellness, and alternative health. So really looking forward to maybe even some destination retreats in the long term. So if anybody has any interest in that or any ideas, they can reach me at my email, as I've said, and I'll be putting together a website so you can see some of those different topics and seminars that I'll be talking about.
That's awesome. So meanwhile, if they email you, they could be in your address, address book,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so much for coming on. I thank my audience, as always, for taking the time to listen. Please give us a subscribe, like, comment, and share. New shows drop every Monday on YouTube and Spotify, Amazon, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and all the others. So thank you, Leslie, so much for this informative interview.
Yeah, and I feel so honored. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, we'll get you back on another time.
Great. I love it. Thank you so much. You take care. Great
all
to
right.
see you.
And
thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for stopping by for another episode of Average Superstar TV.